We're connecting to the live video. Just another second here, and we should be live.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black and Blue in Rochester, an officer's perspective on policing, race, and creating change here in Rochester. Tonight's educational event is focused on understanding an often overlooked perspective, that of Black officers in the Rochester Police Department. Tonight, we'll be hearing from someone who knows this perspective inside out.
Tony, I'm going to pause it for just 1 second because I'm not sure the audio is working. Give me 1 second. I'm so sorry.
That sounded so good, I thought.
It did sound, no, we're live on YouTube.
Listen.
Live on Facebook.
Sounded great.
Okay, 1 second. We're about to go there. My fault.
Wow.
So this is, we can blame the staff, folks. Okay, there we go. We should be live in.
Am I going to start over then?
Why don't you go ahead and start over for the
Okay. All right. So.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Take two. All right. Is that what they're doing now? All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to Black and Blue in Rochester, an officer's perspective on policing, race, and creating change. Tonight's educational event is focused on understanding an often overlooked perspective, that of Black officers in the Rochester Police Department. Tonight, we'll be hearing from someone who knows this perspective inside and out, Marvin Stefferson. Marvin is a Rochester native and former RPD sergeant with 25 years of experience in law enforcement. Today, Marvin is a criminal justice professor at Roberts Wesleyan and an expert on diversity and public safety. We came to know about Marvin through a documentary he produced titled Too Blue to Be Black, Too Black to Be Blue, which depicts how Black officers navigate both RPD and the Rochester community. The PAB has had a chance to watch this documentary, and we have a lot of questions for you, Marvin. We're really thrilled to have you here with us.
Thank you all.
Great. Tonight we're having a relatively unstructured conversation about racism, policing, culture, and creating lasting change here in our local public safety system. Board members can use the raise hand feature to ask a question, please, though people should feel free to have jump in whenever they, to keep a particular line of conversation going. We have our executive director here, Connor, that will keep track of hands, and also I will do the same, and also the vice chair as well. We will be watching on Facebook live stream for questions as well. So if you're out there watching, put the questions that you'd like to hear Marvin answer, and we'll try to get a few of those asked tonight. Before we get started, we've got some quick updates from our executive director. So Connor.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here tonight. I just want to let folks know that the Police Accountability Board has announced a series of community forums on our work ahead to talk about what the PAB is looking to do in the next year, what resources it takes to do our jobs, and get a chance to hear from Rochesterians about what folks want to make sure we prioritize and do in the days, weeks, and months to come. Those events are going to be held across May. We've released the dates for these events. It's all going to be over Zoom. These are going to be Zoom webinars that people can join. They will also be live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. It's going to be Tuesday, May 4th at 6 p.m., Tuesday, May 11th at 6 p.m., and then Sunday, May 16th at 5 p.m. These are great chances for folks to come listen to some facts about what the PAB is up to, and then give us a chance to hear from you about your priorities, your vision, your understanding of PAB, because we can only get public safety reimagined together. So I'm going to make sure that those the links to register for those different forums are going to be in the Facebook chat, so folks can hit that up and register. And we're going to be having a lot of other events coming out around PAB's work, budget, et cetera. So please keep your eyes peeled for all of that. And outside of that, Chair Wilson, I think that's really the primary update I want to give people. And also that next week, the Police Accountability Board will be back next Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Please plan on attending there. We'll be announcing probably tomorrow or Monday. But in short, we're going to have some experts from other police accountability boards across the country coming to talk to us about what PABs like ours need to get our jobs done, the details, the nitty gritty, the weeds. If you like that stuff, please show up. And even if you don't and want to just learn more about how police accountability boards work, please, 6:30 p.m. next Thursday, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, that's where we're at. With that, Chair Wilson, I'm happy to throw it back to you.
Okay, so we're going to get started with Mr. Stefferson tonight. And really just wanted to say again, hi, thank you so much for coming. We have a lot of questions. Really, I think, really just wanted to start with the documentary that you have done, and just so we can inform the public about it, and then just kind of the process of going through it, just to get started. Hello?
I can.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can, yep.
Okay. Okay. All right. So he say the question one more time. I think I my volume was a little low.
Okay, yep. So I just asked if you could just tell us and the rest of Rochester about your documentary. You know, what inspired you to make it? You know, what, it was made a couple of years ago. So kind of the feedback that you've gotten after the fact, and just some general discussion points about that.
Got you. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so a couple of 12 years ago, going back quite a bit. The inspiration behind the film really was just dialogue, between family members who worked in law enforcement, friends. These were circles that I think are really similar to that of any person of color who works in any type of either corporate or blue collar job. You know, we find ourselves around the water cooler or, at a function, and we just share experiences, about the job, whether they're good experiences, bad experiences. And so from that, the film kind of like became life from a book that I was starting and currently am writing about those experiences. So, the narrative of its inception, any one of us of color can probably have placed ourselves in those predicaments. We talk about the first to be fired, the last to be hired, held accountable more so than our counterparts when it comes to certain work and tasks. The perceptions of things that happen in the Black community. We become the experts in answering questions as if we have, the handbook. So these are things that, even police officers are not exempt. And so when we talk about too blue to be black, too black to be blue, the title of it came from, just the experience, when working in a neighborhood that I grew up in, I'm no longer Marvin, I'm the officer. It's like the switch was thrown and I became somebody else that they didn't know. And for me, I had to learn how to navigate that because it felt like I was being, ostracized just because I took this job. And at the same time, working in the law enforcement community, if things happen locally or nationally with someone of color, again, if I have a opinion or perspective on it that is more favorable of the person of color, specifically Black, then, it's like, well, you're not really blue. How can you say that that's unfair or maybe they should just comply? So, you almost feel like you're on this fence, not fitting in either community. And I'm not the only one that has had that feeling. Again, if you speak to anyone active or retired, they're going to be able to say the same thing. There's been times wherein it's been that awkward moment, like, you're too blue to be Black or you're too Black to be blue. So that pretty much set the stage for the title, and then just having those conversations, much like the mainstream community, because the police department really is just a sub community, and so every challenge that you would venture that we're having in the mainstream culture, it's the same thing going on in law enforcement.
Thank you so much. I guess and I can open it up to the group now, but my second question was, how did you navigate that? I'm just really curious about your own experiences about navigating that or towing the line, and about, how did that impact you? How did that impact, we're talking about officer mental health. That's one of the things that, the PAB is very interested in exploring. How did this impact your mental health, having to always kind of, always trying to phase in and out of, every culture that you're in, right? Black culture, police culture. How did that work?
Great question. It still impacts. It's Dr. Joy DeGrew's continual traumatic stress. It's not PTSD for us, because even in retirement, we're still expected to take a certain position. So with the Tamir Rices or the Eric Garners, or this recent with George Floyd, and then what, three more after his somewhat vindication. It's still a struggle, and for me, it's just been a lot of good support with the family, understanding and recognizing that mental health is a huge component of being self-care. Yoga, meditation, having conversations and venting, being angry. James Baldwin said to be Black and conscious, or somewhat conscious, is to be in a constant state of rage. Well, going into work, and I'll never forget sitting in the office and watching the events unfold around Trayvon Martin. And, for me, it hit home because my mom is from Sanford, Florida. I lived with my grandparents for a short period of time in Sanford, Florida, Midway. So to hear that city being mentioned, it's like I have family still down there. That could have been me. That could have been a relative. So you start to have dialogue about why couldn't Trayvon stood his ground. Why was it automatically that he was the bad person? And so just that simple position and conversation starts to set up lines. Well, this person was this, in this role, this capacity. And we know that Zimmerman was merely a neighborhood watch, which wasn't even for that very neighborhood that he was watching. But he took on the personification of, law enforcement or security or being right. So now we start talking about white privilege. So just like, I had mentioned earlier, you have those simple conversations that aren't so simple, because when you take that position, now it's how are you viewed? Are you with us or against us? When we go out on a job, if I, as a white officer, have some type of antagonistic situation with a Black citizen, are you going to stand with me or against me on what you perceive to be, I'm in the right or wrong? Will I say the wrong thing? So now, white officers will be apprehensive, some, not all, but some, around Black officers, or even Latino, Hispanic officers, if we're policing a Hispanic community, or even an Asian community, or an LGBT community, right? Because all the isms are the same. Racism, capitalism, sexism, these are all systems that we struggle with and we fight with. And so, if we haven't figured out how to navigate those particular things right now in our mainstream culture, it only magnifies in such a smaller sub-community as in law enforcement.
Danielle, did you want to start, or board member Danielle?
Yes, I did. Can you guys hear me? You can?
Yep, you're all good.
Okay. Perfect. How's everyone doing this evening? I hope everyone's well. My question would be, the police departments you were a part of, were they aware of the internal struggle Black officers face on a daily basis? And if they were aware, what resources were you offered? Yeah, what resources were you offered?
Great question, again. And, you only know what you know, right? And so, I don't use minority when we talk about Black and brown people, because there's really nothing minor about us. We're the global majority. But at the same time, because of us being that smaller community inside of that community, we don't have the same voice. The issues that we have aren't the priority. So they would tell you that, you have, the mental health aspect of a counselor available, the insurance will cover it, the benefits will cover it, you can go speak to someone. But again, if you're not presenting or setting something up that remotely addresses issues like having a position on, an Eric Garner situation or a Tamir Rice situation where Black officers have an opinion about this. We're not the priority. Not unless there is something where we could become that representative of Black policemen where it benefits the police culture. All right, so it's kind of like that the hood ornament to the car, right? Or we'll bring you out. I mean, like I said, I hate to be political, but we watched the president give his speech, and then who did the Republican Party put out front to counteract the conversation? A Black Republican. It only makes simple sense because now you say that you put someone there, they are now to say, well, it's not a racist policy, it's not a racist because we have a Black person who agrees with that. And so the policies, they make bias or microaggressions or implicit biases become that racist system rather than a presidential act or thought or position. So the police department can do a lot better job at reaching out to their officers of color to ask about the challenges that they may be having behind the scene. The unions could do that as well. But right now, again, when you have leadership that does not look like you, or the culture does not value your position other than to hire you to say we've met our quota for, having so many percentages of Black and brown people on the job. It's just like any other institution where you go to a college or a high school or wherever, they're going to check the boxes. We got the quota, they're here. And then that's it. Nothing about the department looks like a person of color, not even down to the grooming. How do you wear your hair? What's acceptable? All of these different things come into play. And in my 25 years, it was never asked. So I was basically there like many other invisible, but those are things that we're talking about now. And hopefully this conversation will make someone who's watching this say, okay, let's have that serious dialogue with our officers of color and find out, what we can do better.
Thank you. That you definitely answered me. I just have one other question and another question. Do you believe that, I know you had mentioned in your response, when you have people that don't look like you, do you believe that when you have people that look like you, it is more likely that the dialogue will take place?
That's not a guarantee, and I think and many of us that are on this call of color, we know that not everybody that looks like you thinks like you, not what they say, not everybody your color is your kind. I guess I'm telling some secrets right now. It's how we're socially cultured, conditioned, educated. If you're not intact with your ethnicity and your customs and whatnot, then even a person of color who sits at the helm of any organization, if they were raised in a different environment other than that of, say, their ethnicity, then they're just as much out of touch. They're just as much tone deaf or colorblind. And so it's not always that you put somebody of color at the position and say, well, this person is Black or this person is Latino or even this person's a woman, and she's going to identify with and take care of the issues that impact that ethnicity or that gender. So it really comes down to putting the right people at the position that have some history in having done the work, have had the conversations, they fought these fights, then that when they sit at the table, they're going to make sure that all issues are approached and taken care of, or at least addressed in some way, shape, or form.
Danielle, or board member, do you have any more questions? No?
No, thank you.
A board member Brown?
Great evening. Thank you so very much for being with us, and welcome to our other board members and guests who are watching. I'd like to take a step back and ask you personally, Why did you choose to be a police officer? What was the draw? And seeing that once you became an officer and you saw how you were no longer viewed as Marvin, the same way you were on the block, how did you navigate that? And how did that make you feel?
Growing up, I was born in the 60s, so I was that 70s, 80s kid running around, playing cops and robbers. You had, the Mob Squad and Shaft and, so many other different, I guess role models. And you're like, wow, I want to be that person. And who doesn't want to be, the savior or uplifter of their community? So if anybody tells you, oh, Black kids or Latino kids don't want to be police officers, they don't look at it as an honorable profession, that's a lie. We love law enforcement. We want to be a part of it. But what they don't give you is the handbook saying that when you get into that culture, that again, it's not going to be what you thought it was going to be. Because if we talk about the history of law enforcement, we know that it was rooted and started in racism. The police officers of that period during the Jim Crow era and before, they were just an extension of the Klan. All right, their role was specifically to go out and round up runaways enslaved, and so much of the culture, not even the badge itself, changed from the Patty Roller and Slave Patrol badge. If you were to Google the badge, you would see it looks the same. So you're talking about generations of this being passed forward through our Black culture of that trauma, that injury. So, as a young kid, I didn't see it in a negative light. At the same time, I didn't know what it all entailed, but I knew that I wanted to be an officer. So, having the opportunity to live out your dream is exactly what, I took advantage of. And I don't regret it. I love the 25 years that I served my community. I did a lot of great things for people around me. I believe I saved a lot of lives. I again tried to give back as much as possible. But at the end of the day, when you start to reflect upon all the different things, I just think that it was a fulfilling dream to have done that. I would do it all over again. I met a lot of great people, Black, white, male, female, on the job. There's a lot of wonderful people in law enforcement that don't always get the recognition. And so, hopefully I think I answered all of the question. There might be another piece that I'm missing. And if I did, please let me know, because I can go back and touch base on it. But I just wanted to try to cover that, to say that was really the motivation of why I wanted to go in law enforcement. It was always something I wanted to do as a kid.
Yes, the other portion of that question was, how did you handle the homies once you got back on the block? You now have the badge, you're in the blue, and
Right.
you're no longer accepted. How did that work?
So, I think we all can say that at some point in time, you make choices, and some people accept those and some don't, and you have to live with it. It may be a lonely thing, it may not be. For me, it was, the first time I think I had any type of static with people that I actually knew. It was more or less like, oh, are you the same guy or not? And it wasn't until, having conversations, being around them, those that really were friends, they got used to the idea, and they weren't really involved in anything that they couldn't be around me. So it was all right. For those that were out there doing something, they knew, oh, okay, can't be around him. Or if I can, it's only when I'm clean. There's nothing happening, right? But those lines weren't blurred. They were fairly clear. And I've never felt, really alone in the walk, but my friends changed. Family members, some came on, some fell off. So, that's just the reality of it. There was nothing that I controlled. I made the choice to go into law enforcement, and they made the choice of how they viewed me or accepted me or not. So, that's pretty much, I think, everyone's, walk when they go into, whatever it is they do in life. They're going to make decisions that's going to impact people a different way, and you just have to be comfortable in knowing that you're doing what you like to do or love to do, and you're fine with that.
And my final question, one of the things that we as the board have to do is to help change policies, procedures, all of that. But how do you see us being able to affect the culture of the police?
Great question.
Police
Yep.
board? No, you're not the board, but
I know what you're saying.
because okay, first day with my new mouth, I'm tripping over my tongue. But how can we help change that? Because it is so systemic. And that's my last question.
That's the $1 million question. And you got about 400 plus years of a head start on you. And my prayers go out to everyone that decides to step up and be a part of that change, because it's rooted. It's so rooted that, I watched one day my children were out on a little date, and I dropped them off. There was the daughter and her friend and her friend with another young man, and they were getting ready to walk into this particular restaurant, and it was in a whiter part of town. And so when they got out, they walked very apprehensive, not like they belong. And so I'm looking at that and I'm saying, wow, they weren't taught to feel that way or to walk like that. But just the way the eyes of those who sat around looked at them made them feel like I got to present like I'm non-threatening in a certain kind of way. And like, I really do belong there. And so at one point they came back to the car and they were like, well, it's going to be a long wait. I said, no, go wait. You're all right. Go wait. And that's the same thing with dealing with the systemic piece here. It is so socially conditioned, not only in Black people, but white people as well. And so to break down this type of barrier, you got to start in the K, the pre-K and the K through 12. We got to start socially conditioning our children of accepting cultures, accepting people, and looking at us as humanity. Martin Luther King Jr. said in his book that I read, The Chaos to Community, he was talking about that the fight would not be about constitutional rights, but about humanity, human rights. And so right now we're in the very crux of fighting for human rights. The right for George Floyd to live through an investigation of a possible fraudulent $20 bill and not be murdered in front of people for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. It's going to start with that part, and then introducing these things of like not diversity training, but actual cultural competency, where we're talking about cultural experiences, how people view medical treatment, culturally. What is the religious implications? What is the male-female implications? Or if you identify LGBTQ, if you're Black, what part of the country that you grow up in? A Southern Black has a different perspective than that of a Northern Black, or and so these types of cultural conversations and discussions in the academy have to be had, not just to learn about how to do the law and drive the car and shoot the gun and work the baton and the pepper spray, but actually part of the academy should be going out in the community. A part of your academy training should be volunteering at a rec center, at a homeless shelter, somewhere where you actually start to get indoctrinated and enculturated into the community that you're going to work in before you become the authority figure. So at least when you come in there, you may have established some relationships, or at least now you have some kind of a grasp of the community that you're about to work in police in. And you take away that fear element of the unknown of who they are and what they're about. Are they really as violent as the media portray them when you see the constant barraging of shootings and fightings and different things of that nature, but you don't get the same reporting taking place just a couple miles outside of the city line, the city limit, even though we know that crime happens outside the city. right? Because it's not about training when you have officers who go to the same academy that work in the suburbs as the officers that go to that same academy that work in the city, but you have different outcomes, different manifestations. You're heavy-handed inside the city. You're over-patrolled inside the city, not as heavy-handed outside the city. And that's in any city in the country. So it comes down to perspective of who are you policing? What is their culture and custom? How does that influence or impact the way that you police, or you even have a simple conversation? So in the film, I think you've seen Adam McFadden talking about, how do you address the matriarch of someone's family? Because in the Black community, for us, you don't talk to mom like that, especially grandma. Okay, the entire house would empty out and fight you over mama. I've known young men to fight their fathers over mama. Mama is a high regard, and that's not taught in the academy. Okay, so I heard other cultures have their conversations. I'm Italian. I speak with my hands. We're often made aware of how other cultures, move and operate and live, and it's acceptable. But when it comes to our culture, then we become colorblind. Why do I have to be colorblind just because we talk about Black and brown people? I'm not translucent. The rainbow is beautiful when you recognize all the colors. You don't pick out the colors and make it clear just because it's uncomfortable to have these conversations about certain terms and phrases, right? These abstract ways of looking at a community. So that's first thing off. Dealing with that is actually dealing with the humanity piece. It's got to be implicated in the recruitment. When you look at hiring people, what is their background as far as volunteering, or what did they study in school? What were they like as neighbors? Not just because they scored 100 on the test. That's not going to make you the best officer on the job, right? But you don't have any people skill. You can't talk your way, through a jigsaw puzzle. It's remarkable how we measure success, even now as the challenges in the school system. When we talk about standardized testing and other things of that nature, why is this child failing when they're very intelligent? They can go out here and create videos and do all kinds of different things that we can't even begin to wrap our brains around, but they're struggling with basic math. Is it the math, or is it the way it's taught? And I bring that math thing up only because I read an article the other day about Virginia talking about not teaching the children certain math if they struggle with it. So now they're removing the challenges of teaching children. If you can't learn it, so we'll stop. We won't bother teaching you. We'll just let you work with what you already know. That's not learning. That's not even teaching. And so these are the things that we're talking about in the academy when we talk about hiring officers. Look at more than just a test. Who are they as a human being before we bring them on the street? And that's not a new concept. That was Sir Robert Peel, 12 Principles of Policing.
There it is again, that Sir Robert Peel. We just keep hearing about that in the community, that fundamental part of policing that was Victorian England. Very interesting. Reverend Nikoloff.
Thanks, Mr. Severson. Thank you so much for being here. I mean, just your testimony, your witness, your personal account, so much more authoritative than anything people could read on an article or an abstract. Coming at it from a different angle, I recently talked to a police chaplain, not from Rochester, who was very insistent reading passages from Christian scripture like Romans 13, that, police are not just a nice thing for a community to have, but they're like mandated, right? Like in Romans 13,
Matthew,
Christians like
you
to
dropped out for a second. What does Romans say?
Oh, sorry. Romans 13, right? So a lot of times in the culture around policing, those from a Christian background will cite a passage like Romans 13, which talks about how police are part of this idea that there's a sword that the state wields in order to protect people, right? And that they actually are serving on behalf of God, right, to protect the community. that's certainly one interpretation of that passage, and there's lots of interpretations of that passage, not just that one, even though people might pretend that it's the only one. But I'm curious, since you're talking about the culture of policing as an insider, what role does spirituality, does religion, particularly Christian religion, play in either upholding or challenging police culture, especially within police communities? I know from without there's a lot of support as well, but in your experience, did you find that religion was in play, and if so, how did that serve to either uphold or to maybe challenge the cultural status quo in your experience?
Great question. So I was raised in the church, and then you have a lot of officers that are of faith on the department. My only challenge with that is that, are you being religious? Are you spiritual? I mean, I think some of the worst judgmental or hypocritical folk that we've ever met in our lives are someone who starts out with scripture or Bible, and then they start to beat you down. And that can be dangerous. Again, we know that religion is social control, and depending on what you want to talk about, it may be demonizing or diminishing someone, making them feel lesser of themselves. So I'm really mindful about religion. My personal walk with God is my personal walk. When I go out and do my policing, I try to be uplifting, but I also am mindful of that person's position, right? And I think, we talk about Jesus and we talk about his disciples. None of his disciples were perfect, which is what made them perfect for the job, because it shows that you can take somebody with faults and they can still go out and do a marvelous, thing. We talk about a liar becoming, the rock of the church. He's going out here, saving people. Well, how can you tell somebody what's good for you if you've not been in a position where, you weren't living that perfect life? So I think that, a lot of the officers that come in with a religious perspective, I always told my officers, I said, you pray for people. If they want to be prayed for, or you pray for them quietly, they don't have to know you're praying for them. But walk in the way that you would know that it would be right. That God would smile upon your conduct and the way you speak to them. Because the life and death is in the tongue. What you say to somebody can be just as damaging as putting hands on them. How you view them. I always preach that, we're guardians and not warriors, because it's a whole different mindset. 27 years, I was served in 2 different branches of service. I was a warrior. I trained for war, so you crave to battle. You go through that kind of training over and over again. At some point in time, you need to fight because that's what you were prepared for. And so now you're telling officers that they're warriors and not guardians, and so they come out into the street looking for the fight. Mindset. So it's important. We as a trainer, when I was on the department for 20 years, we talk about visualization. See yourself working through a situation successfully all the way to the end. Because if you can see yourself going through it, then you can now walk in familiar path. And so being able to negotiate a situation without going hands-on is the success. I pride myself on having far less fights than I probably could have had. I'm not saying that it's not a violent time. It's always been a violent time. It depends on what's going on in the world. People get impacted by things, and trauma manifests itself in certain ways. Poverty is not a guarantee, but you marry up poverty with a poor education and some other factors, and human beings are going to do things to survive. And so this is what happens, when you start talking about, let's bring a lot of policies and laws into a community that's already struggling, and see if that's going to change the behavior. You gotta try to look at, let's deal with the actual root problem, and that will relinquish some of the responsibility of law enforcement, because now it will fall in other hands who are way more competent in handling things like that. When we talk about mental health and we talk about, chemical dependency and drug addiction or literacy, like prisons, 48% of your prison population is dyslexic, and some 71 to 70% is reading at a grade level of the third grade. So the literacy and the dyslexia, you're over 100% of your prison population. If they could read, or if they were addressing dyslexia, where would they have been other than in prison? It's a great possibility of delinquents, bringing that number down. So, I didn't know all of this during the time that I served, but I'm a reader, and I love picking up books that really, edify my desire to be a better person. And so I think that taking stuff like that and implementing into our curriculum, when we start teaching our officers and whatnot, from the religious aspect as well as the educational, we'll get a lot better performance out of our law enforcement.
Well, I guess just a follow-up question. I'm less concerned with bringing religion into policing. In fact, even though I'm a priest, sometimes I wonder if religion actually serves to uphold some of the negative cultural aspects. So that's, I guess, my question. It's really helpful to hear how a spirituality, like you mentioned, meditation or just your own personal spirituality, can help you to uphold a practice of integrity in your serving. But I guess the question I'm also driving it as, have you seen religion have a negative impact or an enabling impact on police culture, in the sense that police officers might see themselves as enabled to misconduct because they see themselves as serving some sort of religious role without kind of any self-reflection or criticism of that? I know that's kind of a leading question, but I'm curious.
Yes. I was going to say that definitely, it's a great question, and it's a very it's a very wow, it's a deep question, man, because you know what, depending on who you are and where your walk is in salvation, you might see yourself better, and that could be negative, but at the same time, I knew officers that would pray right after roll call. They would get together and they would go in and pray before they hit the streets. So I love that. I love seeing that because, again, I'm talking about humanity, talking about, bringing empathy to a situation. Officers will go to people's homes or places of business or wherever, and you're meeting people at their lowest moment. They're broken, or there's a situation, or maybe they're celebrating something, and then you got to go there and tell them to turn the music down or off, right? So either way, you're interrupting something that is important to them at that time. And how do you do that tactfully, right? Not everybody's going to be appreciative of that. So I think any type of religious reflection, like I said, between, if you're, Muslim or Hindu or, whatever, if it makes you a better person and you're able to go out and see people through their lenses instead of your lens, you see them through the way they see themselves. And from there, you can extract something that you can identify with to give you some type of connection with them. Then I welcome that. And I think that, you going out and attempting to do that inside the community, you'll be embraced, because there's already that community that exists. But it's just having the right messaging as you make that type of walk.
Okay.
I know that's a lot of questions, but I guess I have a final one to follow up. Is that is there a circumstance in which having such a specifically Christian influence could be negative, or could have a negative impact on the police department, and that it would either enable people to think, well, I'm just following God's mandate to defend folks, and therefore influencing a culture in which it's then easy to demonize others, in which other religious or secular views are excluded from the department? Because again, you and I are both from a particular tradition, and so I think we speak a similar language, but there's a lot of people out there who don't, or maybe who don't have as nuanced a view as you, and so might say like, well, God said I'm supposed to be a police officer, so even though it enables me to just wield my beretta as if I'm on behalf of the state and behalf of God. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to drill a little deeper because again, I think you're describing the best that spirituality could play in the life of an officer, and I guess I'm wondering if you've seen the worst it could play, because we're
So-
trying to explore the whole dimension of culture. And again, not
Right.
trying to cross or anything, but
Before you answer that, I just want to just ask the board if you can keep your questions to about 1 or 2, just so that Mr. Stefferson has a chance to answer all of our questions, because everybody has a question and I want to make sure that we answer everybody's questions. So if we can just go on a rotation with questions, that'd be very helpful.
Sure
Thank
thing.
you. All right. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so to answer yourself, I'm sorry, Pastor, but yeah, to answer that question, again, if we go back to the historical piece of this country, and we know that the enslaved were brought here in chains and chained in the basements of churches. So we have people upstairs praising God, and they got enslaved human beings in the very hollows of the church. So let's just put our minds around, how do you say thank you, Jesus, while you have a human being enslaved and in chains? And so, yeah, there's always an opportunity wherein you mix ideology and with your religion. And so now we don't know where denomination ends and religion begins, and vice versa, because we're creatures of habit, and we kind of fix things to fit our narrative. And so, it could be just as beneficial as it could be detrimental. It's just a matter of, again, who's at the point on this, and how mindful of the messaging are you? Are you saying something to people to uplift them, or are you in judgment of them? Or is your messaging making that person feel like they're being judged and lesser than? And so that's a very delicate walk that I think any Christian would say they've had, because I mean, who was always saved? Right? Somebody had to win you over to Christ, and at the time, how many times have you gone to church and had a positive experience or a negative, depending on who approached you and what they had to say or do? And like I said, I was raised in the church. I've seen a lot of both. But I know that's something they got to answer to God for. So it doesn't matter for me to try to wave my finger at them and say, shame on you for being such a horrible Christian. No, God's got you.
Okay. All right. Dr. McIntosh.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a couple questions. So let me just try to preface it by saying this. So just listening to you talk about your experience in the law enforcement department, just hearing that, when we think about all the systems that are impacted, I put myself in your place in a minute, in that moment, thinking about healthcare and about, the issues with the hiring practices and feeling isolated and feeling, not valued. Feeling like you're just kind of like a diversity hire. And I think you said something in the video about our organization purposely not doing diversity. Was that you? Was that your quote? I don't remember.
Actually, no, that was, I'm trying to think. I think it wanted to say it was the lieutenant. I think it was Zabelka.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I do want to ask you this question, because in thinking about that, I was asked a question by Evan Dawson like last year on his show, and he brought up this statistic. He said 92% of white officers say the U.S. has made changes needed to give Black equal rights with whites. Just 29% of Black officers agree. So I guess I'm just kind of wondering, your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Again, depending on who did the study, who they surveyed, I often say, I love statistics and numbers, but at the same time, they can be manipulated. It's real easy for us to go out here on the street and have conversations, and you kind of get the feel or the temperature of a city or a room or whatnot. Any person of color working in uniform, they know that, you know, they walk in two different worlds. You know, there's something that you're going to say or do that you're not going to get the same reception than that of your white counterpart, and vice versa. You know, I can remember having, you know, a white officer one time make a statement to me that I was taking the side of, you know, Black citizen at the time that they were having a more heated discussion. And I had to say to that person, you know, after they had a moment to think about it, you know, what made you, you know, say that? And of course, that officer apologized after thinking about it because he realized, oh, wow, that was out of pocket. And why did I do that? And he actually said to me, you know what? You have a lot harder position than I ever thought about until just now, because he was the one who said that I was taking this person's side merely because I looked like the person that he was talking to, you know, and that's just how he felt for whatever reason that came upon him. But the fact that he was able to self-regulate and think about that and say, wow, wait a minute, that was out of pocket, and then came back and apologized. One, it raised the value for me, for him, you know, because now I said, okay, you know, he caught himself. And so it's a teachable moment. It's not for me to go to HR or somebody and say, oh, he's got to go, you know, because we all make mistakes and we all have to learn or be given an opportunity to learn from it. And so when I'm looking at how many white officers feel a certain way, I kind of understand it, because I know that that person, depending on how they were raised or socialized, they're going to have that perspective and that blind spot or be tone deaf about that. And it's not until they have a conversation with someone who they you know, feel comfortable with or trust, that now you start to challenge those different pillars that have been put in place by the matriarchs of a family or the teachers, right? That's why we said cognitive dissonance, because now you've been told this lie for so long that the truth just does not make any sense. It's inconceivable. How can it be true? Because all these years I've been told this. And now here you come with the truth, and I'm like, whoa, I rebuke that. That's not right. You know, we go through that same challenge when we talk about religion. You know, if something comes up that challenges a religious belief, you're like, nah, missionary so-and-so told me that, or bishop so-and-so told me that. And now you do your own reading, and then you start to say, wait a minute, maybe that was more their interpretation than it actually was scripture. But you got to challenge that. And so that's why I say that, you know, the Black officers that they polled and said they feel the same way as that white officer, probably because of how they were educated and conditioned. Because I know a lot of other folk that don't see it that way. And we do identify with what's going on in the Black community. And it is way too many shootings going on. Deadly force should not be the first option. Mm-hmm. But I also understand from being that officer that when you're in that situation and things evolve quickly, you know, it's fight or flight. And so now you got to, you know, be that one to be judged later on. And hopefully everybody gets all of what took place there and not just a part of the story. So I fully understand why there's an apprehension, and I understand why the numbers are like they are.
Okay, thank you. So one of your things that you talked about, so there's been a lot of conversation about residency requirements. I heard it in the video, and we've kind of spoken about residency requirements as well. Now, there is a lot of individuals that say there's no data. There's no quantitative data, really. But I'm wondering, you know, your thoughts on that. And if realistically, you know, I'm thinking if people actually spoke to people and asked those questions of, you know, if your officer lived here, would that make a difference? They would get probably a different result. So there may not be any qualitative data in terms of, you know, thoughts and questionings like that, but there's definitely been talk that there's no quantitative. So what's your thoughts on that? Policing, if you're living in the city, knowing the issues of the city, knowing the people that you police, doesn't make a difference.
No, I think there's definitely some truth to that. You know, if you live in a certain environment, you're going to be probably a little bit more careful in how you treat that environment. right? Because you have a vested interest. But at the same time, I do understand, that people can live other places and still have just as much love and dedication to that area. And I always use this analogy. I say, I'm a 49ers fan. I don't live in San Francisco, but I'm a diehard 49ers fan, right? Got all my regalia all over the place, and I wear it proudly. And yet I don't live in that part of the country. I don't even live in that city, but I got love for that team. And so that same mindset can be used if the enculturation of those officers are coming in and being, presented with, okay, this is the city, and we're going to go out here and we're going to do work in this area. You're going to meet the people. You're going to be around the people. And you start to garner love and connection with them. So now you don't have to live in that neighborhood to still have love for the people that live there, right? Because now you take a sense of, responsibility of protecting people that live there. And that's what, the whole premise behind having a smaller car beat for the officers, because now instead of having this humongous area that they got to try to cover and still chase the radio, where they can get out the car and actually meet and talk with people and spend time with them. If you reduce that area of responsibility, it gives them an opportunity to be able to get out and spend more time in that area. And that's what it was when I was an officer before I was promoted. I had a car beat. Everybody knew me. Good, bad, or indifferent, they all knew me. Because I walked that street. I hung out talking with the boys on the block, throwing dice and selling weed. We had conversations like they was my nephews, right? And at one point, one of the kids even said to his friends, man, you know what, Marv, I would die for that man. And the white officer was standing there looking like, this guy just said he would die for you? It looked weird to him that, this is the same kid I lock up, but the thing was that we had a connection.
Mhm.
I knew what he was doing. I knew why he was doing it. And I would tell him, hey, there's no retirement in that. There's no pension. You better find something else to do. Because look, you got to look over your back, for me and for the cat that want to rob you. So where's the peace in that? But having that kind of conversation, that kind of rapport with them, it wasn't about, you're a drug dealer and that's it, you're a bad person. I look beyond that, because situations and conditions, will make any person become something that they're not. Right? Some make choices and they find themselves there, and some, are kind of relegated there because of circumstances. And so, that's pretty much my response, I guess, in a long-winded kind of way.
Yeah, I think that was good. But my last question is really for the community. So there's been just a lot of talk, when you heard about the protest, individuals may just feel like all they can really, do is protest. All they can do is, advocate for different laws. So what would you tell the community, in a sense, especially with everything going on, that are trying to focus on human rights and get justice for misconduct? What would you tell them?
Protesters protest and looters loot. They're not one and the same. Looters go out to loot. That's their mission. That's what they plan on doing. They had it already in their mind to do it before they got out there. Protesters, they don't come packed and ready to do that. So that's why we knew that when you saw the insurrection take place on January 6th, who's bringing a rappel rope and all kind of different bear spray and other things like that to a protest, because they had other motives that they were planning to do. Right? So protest has been a part of this country. The Boston Tea Party, we can go down the historical list. Protest has always been a part of the fiber of this country. If you don't like something, you bring notice to it, you challenge it, and you demand something else. And trauma, it manifests in different ways. I'm no doctor, but I know there's probably some doctors on here that could tell you, that we all will react differently to trauma or to injury. Some might yelp, some might fight, some might cry or scream. You can't judge on a person of how they respond. And so when I see people that protest, there's a reason, there's a hurt. Okay, like I said, I watched George Floyd's the trial rather of Chauvin, and for that first week of it, watching it, which I forced myself to do, I cried. you know, because that was a very impactful thing. You know, I'm looking at this officer saying, how could you do that? You know, he was not fighting you to the point where you had to do that. And so to hear the little girl saying that she has nightmares of wishing that she had done more and she's apologizing to a dead man, it hurts. You know, an elder man sitting there saying that, you know, he was telling George to give up and he dies and he's crying on the stand, that hurts. And if you're not moved by that, you're not a human being and you should not be in uniform. You know, I mean, I've had a lot of people say a lot of nasty things to me, do things. I even had people, you know, that have pulled weapons on me. Never to the point that I end up killing them. And if I fought them and there was injury, I got them to the hospital and got them treated. And then we took them to jail, you know, because you understood what your role was. And my family, you know, much like I knew my sacrifice, they knew what the consequences could be, you know. And if you're not prepared for that, then you shouldn't be in this job. We all know that there's some dangers to doing this. I don't agree with the police department in California talking about walking up on cars unarmed. It's an unknown. It's too dangerous. But could you walk up there with a different mindset? Absolutely. Right? Learn how to talk or identify what a threat really is. So, you know, there's things that I hear in the defunding piece of law enforcement, and I get it. You know, I know that some things aren't wise to do, you know, because the police really are not our enemy. But there are some in there that don't belong. And so getting the officers that are there that may have knowledge of that to speak up, we got to make it so that it's safe for them to do so, because it's not safe. You know, unless you walk in those shoes, it's a very easy ask, but it's a lot more difficult when you're in there and you can be easily isolated. And so we got to do the things, you know, responsible enough to keep them safe, but at the same time, let them know that they got support, that they can speak up. And so that's one thing I would say to the PAB and to anyone out there. You know, you can identify the good people in there and you can get them in a place. It's just like a domestic violence victim. You know, they're not going to speak up if they know they're not safe. You got to make a situation safe for them to be able to open up and tell you what's going on. And it's the same thing with law enforcement, with the good officers in there and during this time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're at Board Member Perez.
Yes. Thank you again for being here with us. I want to go back to two questions that you answered earlier for other folks. One of them was your response about, you know, always wanting to be an officer when you were a little kid. I just recently had some conversations with some colleagues of mine. I actually work in the early childhood field, have done so for close to 40 years. In fact, Danielle, board member Danielle, was one of my preschool students. So,
Wow.
so I go that far that back. But so there was some conversation on a pre-K, UPK and EPK programs. There's some curriculums that we follow that are given to us by the district. And one of them is, which is now in this, around this season, where we talk about community helpers. And there were some teachers that were very concerned of how do you do that in a classroom with preschoolers when you know, because we always talk about officers, right? Police officers, the police officers in our community, you know, and they were very concerned as to what they might encounter if they were to bring that up with a child that may have experience, or just with everything that has been happening, you know, because unfortunately kids hear these conversations, they see stuff on the news, they see how us as adults react to these situations. And so what advice do you give us when we're ready to do that and we do encounter children that may have had bad experiences with police? And what would be, you know, I always tell people, you're going to be able to say the right thing at that moment when it comes, But what advice do you give us in regards to that?
So, excellent question again. Everybody's really some great questions here. I would start out with having the officer come not in uniform. You do it in a way that is, let's see, I hate to do the animal stuff here, but when we take our pets to be socialized, we get them around an environment, and we take the extra care to make sure that that animal is not startled, right? So we talk about socializing. When I used to socialize my puppy, bringing around other dogs and show them how to be safe, but at the same time. So I would say have that officer come in around the little ones in a non-threatening fashion, in no uniform. And then over a period of time, after the rapport is built, you put them in uniform.
Mhm.
And now we explain to them, okay, this is Officer so-and-so. Remember, they came here in the t-shirt and shorts or jeans or whatever, and now here's their uniform. Maybe have the uniform hanging on the rack at first, and he can explain, or she can explain what the uniform is, and now you put them in the uniform.
Yeah.
So it eases that child into that relationship and connecting with that person, where they're dealing with their trauma and their fear, but at the same time, they're connecting the two of this person I just gained rapport with, that's a great person, and they're in this uniform.
Mhm.
And so now they're going to go out seeking those individuals based upon that relationship with the officer that came to the school. And so that's that dual part of making sure that that's going on in the academy and in the sections, right? Because we can't do one thing over here and the other side not be connected to it, because then they will show up and destroy all of that great work that you've done in the school. So everybody's got to be on the same page.
Mhm.
And that's where it comes back to that whole diversity training piece, wherein the curriculum and how you're instructing, talking about cultural conflicts and cultural competency and all that stuff, that's all got to be on the same page from the academy to the actual road, so that everybody's doing the same thing.
Mhm.
And it's not foreign to them, because we teach that in the academy. When we talk about how do you wear your uniform, or how do you deploy mace, or how do you use the baton and handgun, everybody's getting the same uniform training, so they respond the same way. So the cultural competencies got to be the same way. It's got to be rolled out, so everybody's doing the same thing, same terminology, all of that. And so that's what I would offer to that with the kids coming, they also come into the school to see the kids. Start out with no uniform.
Mhm. That's
And then
very
work 'em into
similar
it.
to the fire department. I know the fire department, they do that. They'll come without their uniform, and then they slowly put on the mask, and because that could be very scary for kids. So I can see that concept working. My other question is, you talked about having officers be part of a community as part of their training before they start working in that community. We've had many incidents, unfortunately, where, and I'm not sure, right, if this is true or not, where they use a lot of the new police officers as part of their training. They use them during the Puerto Rican festival aftermath to deal with the crowds, right? But these are new officers. These are officers that perhaps have never, ever had an encounter or any kind of relationship with Latinos, although in the aftermath is just about everybody. It's not just Latinos, by the way, but we get the blame for it. But they've never had an encounter, and this is their first encounter. And they come with all the big guns, all the big toys are taken out for these type of events. You talked about, how they police in the city and how they police outside of the city. The same thing happens with the Puerto Rican festival. How do they deal with the aftermath for the Puerto Rican festival in comparison to East Avenue and, other festivals that take place in Rochester, were viewed the same way via media. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough one. Only because I've been a part of the response, working in the TAC unit. I've been out there, and I can't say I've always agreed with the approach of dealing with the aftermath, because it hasn't always been the festival, it's been the aftermath, you know, the people that want to continue celebrating and do it in their fashion, right? Shooting off guns, letting off fireworks, all kind of different things. You know, for people that's got to go to work next day, they're dealing with all this loud ruckus and the screeching and squealing of tires and stuff like that. It's a tough one, only because we really have not nailed down how to address the aftermath, and that is because I don't know if the community outreach before the event is really done in a more how can I say, more responsible way, right? Like we wait to the last hour to start putting things together, and then when it all falls apart, you know, we go back to what we've been doing, and that is, all right, let's get all the mobile field force and pepper ball and you know, and it becomes this crazy game, you know, cat and mouse, because then the kids that are doing it, they actually enjoy it. They actually enjoy being chased by the police. Let's go over here and do this. Then we're gonna go over here and do that. We're just gonna have them chase us the whole night, and we're drinking and you know, videoing ourselves, because we all live in this whole social media of posting and us, you know, living our best life. And so you got young officers, you know, and I hate to beat up on the young ones, fresh out of college, no life skills, no family. So, you know, how do you tell a young kid to deal with another young kid, right? You know, you get an older person, they're gonna be like, look, you know, and I'm not dealing with all this, you know, let them go out there and till they finish and get tired and then go home. Just as long as nobody kills each other, that's all we care about. And so the veterans, you know, officers, they kind of just lay back a little bit. And I'm thinking that approach is that, you know, you look at the elders of the community, you know, getting that literature and that message out to where the kids are before the festival happens. Okay, you know, we're gonna celebrate, we're gonna do this, but this is what we need at the end here. And we started out.
So interesting that you say that, because last year or the year before, we put a Northeast safety committee together. We work with officers as well as people in residents, community leaders, and we did just that. We planned for a whole year. We communicated early on what we were going to be doing. We actually blocked certain areas of Clinton Avenue and Clifford and some other areas, and engage people in different ways. We even had like DJs and drummers, and the kids were able to ride their bikes and everything. It didn't matter. The police still came back. The plan that we had went out the window, and they came back exactly just like you said, the same way they've done every single time. And so that was very discouraging and very disappointing for the safety committee people that worked for a whole year, because at the end of the day, they did what they wanted. And it was interesting because they were in areas where people were not doing anything, and they still had their big guns and their loudspeakers and, you know, telling people to move, and there was nobody there to move. So I fully believe that it was a training tactic more than anything else, and they use us for that. So, but thank you.
Lack of communication, you know, you're welcome. I mean, communication is key. If everybody's on the same page, you know, it's not going to be 100%, but eventually what happens is that if everybody's on the same page and we know what the left hand is doing and the right hand is, you know, it's got to be a trust factor that what you guys are trying to do is actually working. You know, I always say, if anybody ever been to a party, you know that when the party ends and everybody's still hyped up, you want to go somewhere and finish partying. So you got to wind that thing down, you know. So how do you wind everybody down before the end? You don't wind them down at the end. You wind them down before the end, so that when they leave there like, okay, I'm ready to just go and chill. So, you know, I think it's a matter of, like you said, now planning earlier and actually, you know, test running on some other smaller festivals and seeing what happens to implement it on that. Because that has been a sore for, you know, some years. And again, if it's not working, that one particular plan, then you got to look at doing something different, you know, or at least be willing to try something different every time. you know, because the officers get tired too. I know I was one of those guys, you know. And there's accountability on all parts. The neighborhood has got to be, you know, those that are out there doing that, they got to be accountable to their actions just as much as the officers. So it's a team effort.
Thank you, board member. Dr. Harvey.
Okay, thank you so much for being with us, Officer Stephenson. Really enjoying the time with you. I'm a 1960s baby also, and I grew up on the Mod Squad, SWAT, CHIPS, and I think my favorite cops were the cops on Sanford and Son, you know, and of course we had Officer Friendly in our schools. And so as a 1960s baby, I grew up with cops being heroes. They were heroes to us. They were people that we looked up to. We were very happy to see them when they came to our school as Officer Friendly. And as a 1960s baby, I remember years ago feeling safe and secure in the presence of police. Even when we were on the corners playing ball and things were getting out of hand, when a policeman came at that time, you felt, okay, here is help. Being 57 now, that's totally different. And I've said this probably on a number of occasions when I'm driving my vehicles, and I don't drive the souped up cars. Tinted windows, yes, but I don't have the big wheels, the 22s and the spokes and the rims and, you know, just decent vehicles. When the policemen get behind me, I look for the first possible exit, whether it's a 7-Eleven, a gas station. I turn my car to a place to where I feel safe. So I'm saying I feel so unsafe now in the presence of police when, as you mentioned, the 1960 baby was so safe. So I guess the question for that would be, are policemen aware of how the community has changed from the heroic presence to the presence of fear? That's one question. I'll give them all and I'll be done. And then secondly, you mentioned that you never killed a person. You said if you hurt somebody, you took them to the hospital and then to jail. And I'm just wondering to what extent in your career, if you can, have you had to hurt somebody, and with what was it? Taser, pepper ball, actually shooting. And then finally, in the George Floyd case that we all witnessed days ago, we saw officers come out and testify against officers. Even the chief came and testified. And I thought, what a precedence that was, you know, for an officer to testify against an officer. And my question would be, do you think that's a new precedence that we will see in the future? And do you think that that precedence will help to hold officers accountable when they know that their partners or their colleagues are subject to tell it like they saw it, which is sometimes the way the public sees it?
Okay, so I'm probably gonna answer this question going backwards just so I can ask that first one again. Yeah, I do believe that that is a, you know, anytime something happens, that's a precedent. So the fact that you have the chief and you have other officers that was on the stand speaking to their expertise and experience in what is good policing and what isn't, you know, that has opened up the platform for others to be more not so much transparent, but more open and into, you know, saying, yes, this is not what policing is. So definitely seeing that was like, wow, you know, because you haven't seen anything like that. That was, you know, you saw it coming. If you really watched all the other trials or other encounters and whatnot with the different events that have taken place across the country, the chiefs and the other high-ranking officials in law enforcement, you seen it coming. So you knew that it was kind of like inching its way to this point because there was more accountability in saying and admitting and acknowledging. And now we have them actually holding people to the fire on the stand. Okay, so definitely, yes, I believe that's a precedent that has started now, and it's not going to be rolled back. The second question, all of my stuff is documented. You know, if I got into a fight with someone, it's because there was nothing else that was going to be said. It was because I had to. Whether it was taking them into custody because they had hurt someone, or they just didn't want to go to jail because they knew what they were facing based upon what they had done. And so some people make that conscious choice. And I always told my officers, I said, we take verbal abuse, but not physical. Yeah. So if you raising hands, then you getting hands. And you're going to get it to that point wherein to get you in custody, and then it stops. And that's what I was telling my officers. The fight stops once they're handcuffed. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's it. As long as you unhandcuffed, is always an opportunity for you to do something. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, being a human being, I want to come home the same way I left. I want to see my family. I don't want my wife getting a flag. Mm-hmm. I don't want my kids getting stories. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I didn't say go out there and shoot first, mm-hmm. but protect yourself when you need to do so. Yeah. And then I did. Yeah. And like I said, at the end of the day, I'm taking you to the hospital. I'm gonna get you treated, right? Because I'm a guardian, not a warrior. And then the first one, Dr. Harvey, what was that first question?
Well, it was about, you know, we saw policemen as heroes, as young people, young men, and we saw them as people to help us. And now when I see police, if I'm driving, I don't see them as people that's going to help me. And one of the things I'll say too, one of the things I appreciated about the prosecutor in the George Floyd case, he said to the juror, the police department is not on trial, and that this person does not represent. And I know that when the things that we see on TV, the things that happen even in our city, they cause us to be fearful and not feel safe and protected. But I do realize that there are policemen in our city and other cities who could make us feel the way you have made us feel in this presentation. So I'm saying, I do know that not all of them are bad, but the bad ones cause us to feel unsafe about all of them because we don't know the difference.
Right.
And we don't know the difference. We know that there are some good ones, but we don't know the difference. We don't know who's who.
I got you. And you know what? The truth be told, when a car gets behind me and lights me up, I feel the same apprehension that you do. Because I don't know if I know that officer that's coming to my car, you know, and I've been stopped out of state. You know, I've been in other places where I know they don't know me. And if I don't get my hand on my wallet, you know, with my retiree badge, you know, it's anybody's guess. It's anybody's guess. So I feel my heart races. I get the same way because I know that, hey, I got to say the right thing. I got to make them feel a certain kind of way. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about, you know, my daughter with her friend and being in that part of town wherein the folk were looking, and they had to present a certain kind of way to make these people feel like they're safe. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the part that we got to address, that systemic piece that is in everyone And now you put them in a law enforcement or a firefighter or a teacher role, and that still privilege of you got to make me feel better, right? So Robin DiAngelo talks about that white fragility. I got to be able to accept the fact that you might be upset about what happened to George Floyd. And even if you get angry about that, you still got to do it in a way that I can accept it. And so now this officer walks up to your car and stops you. Maybe you're on your way to a funeral, or you're on your way to an event, right? And so you might be a little bit excitable. And now the officer starts to read your excitability as resistance or something. And that can go south real quick if that officer is not aware of the cultural connect to you going to a funeral. No different than if they were going to a funeral. You're hurt, you're grieving, and you're just not really thinking about what's going on around you that well, right? So you may go through that stop sign, or you may speed a little bit and not be aware that you got your foot heavier on the gas at that moment. So it's keeping those officers in the know, in the mindfulness that how are you impacting that person in the car before you get up there, right? And so you de-escalate, you measure the temperature of what's going on. You know the difference between somebody trying to hide something and somebody just having a bad day, okay? And if you don't understand the community that you're policing, then you might misread how that person is feeling or acting. And so that's why it's so important, like I said, with us socially conditioning our children and our young folk, even the young folk that come into the academy. You can't take them back to kindergarten. You can't go back to that first 7 years of life when you're just teaching them how the world operates, right? When they're in that sponge, mindset. Now they're out there actually subconsciously going through all the things that you instilled in them. So if you instill prejudicial things into them, then now they're going out here and it's manifesting itself in whatever they go into. And so I understand that. I fully understand that. And I'll give you a story. When I got stopped in Atlanta, 96 at the Olympics. And I had a friend of mine who worked Toronto PD. So it's he and I and two other officers that were from England. And we were all down there as part of the security detail. And the officer pulled me over on a darkened road back in the area of Stone Mountain. And he comes up, I got my license, got my registration, got my badge and everything out. And he takes my license registration and he hits my hand, knocking my badge and ID out. Say, "You ain't no cop. Not you're not a cop here. You're not a cop." And so I'm sitting there going, wow. I knew where I was. I understood what was going on. And so did the officer from Canada. But the three officers from England, they were like, "Is that how y'all treat each other here in law enforcement?" And of course, the Canadian friend, he says, "We're in the South." So again, we come back to, how are we recruiting? How are we training and teaching as it relates to humanity pieces, the culture, environment and situation that people may be experiencing some things, not about just the whole training of how to use this weapon and how do you speak to somebody, you command presence and you got to be in charge at all times. Sometimes you might take that cop hat off and become a parent. Okay. Or you may have to be the mom and dad or the uncle or the auntie, right? Or the brother. I didn't always wear the cop hat when I was policing. Sometimes the situation called for me to be a different thing. Sometimes I was the priest and I was ministering to him, quoting scripture. Sometimes I was the teacher and we would talk about education. Wasn't that great in finances, but sometimes I would give some financial advice. It was whatever it called for. And so I guess there was a question that you all had about law enforcement, doing everything and being involved in everything. And how do we take some of the workload off of officers? Honestly, it's really about partnership and putting people in place to be there with them. Because there's no job that I could think of that you could actually take away from the officer and say, okay, if you had to do this one job, this is what you could do, right? Because we really are that fire extinguisher to situations. We come in and we're expected to put every fire out. And we're expected to be able to critically think and know how to work through situations. But having someone there who is part of that mental health piece to hand off or to take a secondary role and let them be the primary, that's major. Having somebody there for social services when we're talking about dealing with young folk, if we're talking about autistic, or Down syndrome, anything that's outside of our wheelhouse, having those support pieces in place to help us out, that minimizes the stress and minimizes the possibility of things going wrong, because we really learn from our mistakes. If we encounter the deaf community and we cuff their hands, which they need to use to speak, we find out after the fact, after all of the paperwork is done and we had this huge fight, that, it was just a matter of keeping their hands free, because we realized that they're part of the deaf community. But we didn't know that until we had to know it after we made that mistake. So, that's where we can really benefit by helping the law enforcement, is understanding a lot of the missing pieces that they need as far as assistance as well as education.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Dr. Harvey, or sorry, Dr. Harrison.
I know it's easy to confuse us.
It's true.
Hi, Mrs. Stephenson. Something's
How
gnawed
you
at
doing,
me.
sir?
Something's gnawed at me for quite a while now. A while back, a police officer accidentally shot himself on his way to work. Is it routine that Rochester police carry chambered weapons?
So I think I remember that. And, you have your off-duty weapon as well as your duty weapon. And, we carry our weapons fully loaded and
chambered.
And chambered. So the probability of accidental discharges, probability of us crashing in cars because we spend so much time with those weapons and in those vehicles, it's just one of those unfortunate things that is a possibility, because it's always a part of our daily, operation.
I've just wondered about the chambering, having grown up around guns. The second question is, I served in the U.S. Navy, and you don't have
Thank you
to.
for your service.
Thank you. I understand you served too.
Yes, sir.
But it doesn't take more than a day or two to realize that the chief petty officers run the Navy. It's not the admirals, it's not the captains, it's the chief petty officers. I assume, and I'm asking this actually as a question, that sergeants perform the same tasks for police forces?
Being familiar with the chief, I could say yes. Yeah, we are that line of supervision that is out there on the road with the officers daily, from roll call, where we give the assignment of cars and task, to managing them on the street. We're the ones that report back to the lieutenant and everybody else. So yeah, we're the ones that run everything.
Okay. The last question I had was just based on your observations. I know you can't be accurate or precise about this, but what percentage of the Rochester police force would you think are comprised of white supremacists, and how many are composed of ex-military?
Wow, great question. I knew you was gonna do this to me. I do not have the data, but if I had to go with what we see in a mainstream society, one, recruitment wise for the law enforcement, a lot of military, and I can say that because of military, the transition from military to law enforcement is really seamless, because it's a similar setup. That's why they call law enforcement paramilitary. The same hierarchy, uniform wearing, regimented, functions of work and whatnot. It's so similar. It's just an easier, it's an easier fit for us as law enforcement recruiting folk from the military, because there's very little that we have to on the side of rank and structure and all those other pieces that you already practice in the military. But much like the military, again, when people come into the military or they come into law enforcement, they come in with their biases, right? And so when you take laws that are prejudicial and you take people with biases and you put those together, that whole prejudice and power, that's what creates racism. That's the formula. So, you know, if I have privilege and in that privilege, I have prejudice, and then now you give me power, I may make the decisions or the discernment of things that are beyond just being implicitly biased. Now it becomes more racial because guess what? I'm making a stop solely because that person is Black or that person is Latino, right? Or they're Asian. I got a problem with them because that's how I view them. And so that's the piece where law enforcement has to figure out, how do we still do our job, but we don't bring our biases into where it becomes a factor. Like if I'm only stopping people of color, that's got to come up that in your stats. Hey, I see you making a lot of stops of people and the percentages there are all of color. What's going on? Right? We know that you a lot of Black and brown people live in that area, but is everybody you stopping got to be this demographic? We know that a lot of people move in and out that area. So that's the question that falls upon not only, like you said, the supervisor who runs the street. I saw where you're going with that, Doc. But at the same time, those stats are collected by the police departments. And if they're not being recorded so they can monitor it, then that's something that needs to be done, just so that you can be more intentional on making sure that we don't have somebody out there that are making those prejudicial stops. You know, it's just like if you were out there stopping cars with women all the time, and now all of a sudden we get a complaint. So now we say, okay, we see you stopping nothing but women, and we got a complaint. So it's kind of like that creature of habit. We can do a profile and figure out what's going on there. So the same thing, and it don't have to be the person is actually prejudicial. It's just that if they're doing that a lot and you check them and then we bring them in and say, hey, what's going on, and ask the questions, it makes them more mindful of, okay, well, let me be a little bit more unbiased in my stops, or maybe I need to recalibrate my compass. You know, because when I went to the Million Man March, I went to the march because I was so tired of hearing on the radio for the male Black that just did the shooting, for the male Black who was in, for the male. I, as a Black man, was starting to feel like there was nothing but Black people doing crime, because that's all I heard for 8.25 hours, 5 days a week. And I was being conditioned to see that. And so I wasn't looking for anybody else to stop as a Black man. So going to the march, it helped me see brothers in a positive light that kind of rebooted myself to say, oh, okay, we're not all bad. We are not all bad, right? And so if I'm feeling that way, what is the white officer feeling? Who may be starting from a different playing field than me, right? So that's the thing that we got to take into consideration. Putting some positive things in their view, rebooting them, so they don't get conditioned to keep seeing one thing and then when they get called on it, you're like, whoa, I'm not that. But that's what the imagery is of it, based upon the fact that you're being conditioned like this, and everybody on the outside don't know that. So all they see is you being biased and you making that stop, and they see it happen nationally, right? So what happens in California impacts me. So that's some of the things that we got to look at taking care of.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Connor, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, we have so many more questions to ask. We're already past our 8 o'clock window. And so, Marvin, I just hope that you'll be able to stick with us in the months and years to come, obviously. I think tonight's been just a really great source of information for us in the community. And I'd hope that you'd be willing to, let us follow up with you and ask some questions that the community reached out to want to get answered, that we want to get answered, because we need this kind of honest feedback, insight, perspective. And so please just be willing to take our phone calls still, all right?
I'm on the campaign trail, so you can hit me out there, running for County Legend Child Eye, and I'm always running. But because of what you all are doing, that is really the reason why I'm campaigning and running for office, is because I want to be a part of a positive change that benefits everyone. And so even if running in Chili, I can still do impactful things for the city, it ultimately comes back out to Chili. And it goes to Brighton, and it goes to Henrietta, and it goes to Greece. And that is the thing that we got to get ourselves wrapped around, that racism is borderless, but we address it in borders, right? We only want to deal with racism in the city, but you know, that stuff goes out to the suburbs and then it comes back in. We got to fight racism the same way that it is. It's borderless, and we got to be borderless. And that's my ending statement on that.
All right. All right. Thank you so much for talking to us tonight. You know, very insightful, really nice to hear your experiences within the RPD of all your 25 years. And I guess I just want to just ask, you kind of touched on this, but, we need a police accountability board for these things that you're saying right now, right? That all of the experiences that you've had, all of the, I wrote down a statement, I was invisible, and that just really was impactful for me to hear that. So thank you so much for all of your time and expertise. Thank you to the board for all of your wonderful questions. Thank you to the community for listening and giving us all of your wonderful questions, because there were quite a few. And we will see you next week.
Take
Thanks
care,
again.
everyone.
Good night, everyone.